Killer Cam comes to town and takes the Knicks off the court at MSG. We break it all down right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. Right here is Adam Armbrecht. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them that Locked On sent you. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Free on all those great platforms. Doug! Comeback victory at MSG. Nothing is sweeter. I don't get in the weeds on this stuff, but it does feel pretty good to have an epic comeback against the Knicks on their home court, led by the young rookie.
Man, that was awesome. I was feeling it down the stretch there. That game, I mean, what a comeback. Once it starts looking like it's in sight, you really just want to make sure they are able to follow through with it. And we're going to talk about Cam, obviously. We'll talk about James Johnson. We'll talk about some of the adjustments they made. But this is just one of the best wins of the season. You really, in a time where the Nets really needed it. Obviously, they broke the losing streak last game. They really need to get off the schneid. It really looked like they had just taken their foot off the gas in the first half when the Knicks just made everything. To be able to have the heart to fight back all the way from a game where you're down 28 at one point, and it's basically over, to come all the way back against this team. And, is a Crosstown. It's an away game. So that's, it's not in Barclays. This is just one, they called it at the end of the broadcast, like a galvanizing win for the team. You can't look at it anything else but that. It's like just one of the true games they needed. They fought back. They kind of they did everything right down the stretch, and it was just an awesome win.
I got to tell you, too, we'll check the facts here and make sure it's in the show notes, if not correct. But I believe Michael Grady mentioned largest comeback in franchise history, down 28 points. So when you talk about an opportunity without Kyrie Irving, without Kevin Durant, no Ben Simmons out there yet, and the way that this game starts, where, to your point, it felt like this could have just kind of gotten away from them. You get the good feeling of getting a win with some of these new players on the court the game prior. And then a big step back here. We know they have a back-to-back coming up here before the All-Star break. This is kind of what we were hoping for in terms of riding a bit of this good vibe wave after the trade. And, I mean, man, listen, it has to be in and around and all about Cam Thomas, who early in this one looked like he just couldn't find his rhythm. 1 of 9 from the field to start. It didn't have the too bright of lights, whatever you want to call it, of MSG. And then all of a sudden, second half, he just starts to slowly navigate the court, pick his spots on the floor. There's tons of things I want to get to around his game, but clearly he's shown this before already this season. But boy, did he step up and take over this when no one else seemingly was going to be able to get it done on the offensive end for Brooklyn.
Yeah, completely crushed the Knicks drop coverage in the second half. He just kept getting to a spot over and over. He's the kind of player, and we've seen this from the beginning, like right back all the way to Summer League, is that missing shots is not going to be a problem from him from like a psychological standpoint, right? Like, is it going to be a problem for him when he just, he's just a streaky shooter and, he's just a volume shooter, and guys like that aren't going to like get dismayed or dissuade away from their shot because a few haven't gone in. And some were bad misses early too, frankly. And it's just not the kind of thing. It's just not the kind of thing that bothers me. It's funny. He's not a comparison like this, but one of my first like basketball idols was Allen Iverson growing up in Philadelphia. And the Iverson years where he was just basically the whole team. There was the joke around him at the time was that he's just going to shoot his way out of it. Right. Like, and if you followed the Allen Iverson experience, that was it. It was like, hey, he's just going to put up 30 shots. Like, it doesn't matter if the first 29 missed, like number 30 is going up. And I think like to some degree, he's not there. Their style of play is totally different, but like to some degree, the mentality is the same. You can see with Cam Thomas, because it just doesn't matter if the other shots miss, because he just believes that the next shot is going in. Yep. And that was sort of the theme late in this game, was like, hey, these are just going to go in. And he kept finding his spots. Like he said, he destroyed Mitch Rob, just kept dropping in the drop coverage. That was such a mistake over and over again. And then to bury the three that was basically the dagger. I know it wasn't the end and it wasn't a buzzer beater, but for him to step up in the half court and just basically drill that shot was just a testament to the mentality that this guy has. And the Nets really found something here in the draft. We saw it in summer league. It continues to play out. It's still a work in progress, but these are the games that just solidify this idea that like Cam Thomas was drafted well above his draft slot. And that's just it. He's just a flat out scorer.
Oh, yeah, and I really thought, to your point about finding the spaces on the floor, getting his shot, working himself into that game. The first half was his sample size of trying to attack at the rim a little bit. Some of the perimeter looks weren't going either, and I think that that's a really good sign. We've talked all season long about his development, the evolution of his game, and I thought he did a really good job in this one of digesting information from the defense and then making an adjustment about how he could find opportunities for himself. By the end of it, this is just a kid that's a pure scorer. And like you say, the dagger triple is just kind of the, hey, I'm fully in my bag now. Everything's flowing. Everything's feeling great. But the contrast from the first half where he was 1 of 9, then went 8 of 12 over the back end of this game was the difference of him saying, I can penetrate and then also navigate with enough quickness to the mid-range spots, turn around and get my looks up, as opposed to fighting in size, a lot of big bodies there. He got it rejected a lot early in this game, completely went away from that on the back end.
And you saw how the rest of the team started to defer to him late, right?
Yeah.
Like he was, for all intents and purposes, getting choked up about this Cam Thomas performance. But for all intents and purposes, he was the guy. Like Seth Curry, Patty Mills, LMA, like these guys saw it late. They're like, hey, he needs the ball, right? The Knicks were sort of starting to sell out to make sure he couldn't get shots. That actually opened up shots for Aldridge late. Was that like they just, they were trying to trapping Cam Thomas late in games. Like that's just such a testament to what they didn't want him to be able to do. And they were doing it to Curry and Mills early in the game too. But it was just like a testament to what they didn't want to happen, which was for him to keep getting shots off because it was a clear identification that they were just kind of going in. And that actually led to a couple other good looks for the Nets, even when he didn't shoot it. But the fact that they deferred to him late in the game, I think is such a sign about his maturation, both as like we see him as a scorer and how the rest of the team also sees him. This is a freaking rookie. Like this is a guy like Patty Mills, Seth Curry, LaMarcus Aldridge. These guys are veterans, right? Like these guys are, some of them are a little bit basketball long in the tooth. And for them to see, hey, our best chance to win here is for him to get good looks and for us to like do everything we can to get him looks because he's just feeling it right now. It's not the only reason they won the game, but man, it's such a huge one. And if you're going to look back at a Cam Thomas sort of like performance at the end of the year or next year or whatever, like we just have to remember this as a stepping stone game for him because he was the dude. Like he was the guy that the Nets looked to late in the game to win the game, and he did it.
And listen, you bring up a couple of good things there. One, that even Seth Curry, even Patty Mills, right? These guys are players that fill certain roles, but you don't expect them to be the leader of your team. And I'm not saying that Cam Thomas is supposed to be the leader of this team, but it's the untapped what if, right? What is the potential of this kid? He can be a superstar in this league at some point. Nobody else that's on the court for the Nets in this particular game has that possibility, right? We don't have any question marks around, is Seth Curry going to turn into a number one shooter, leader of a team at some point? Cam Thomas could be. And this is a great instance where he showed that. And I was going to hold off on this until later in the show, but it was such a high energy moment around it. Following the late game sequence in the fourth quarter, when the ball goes out of bounds, turnover, gets it back to the Nets, Kevin Durant, who was invested in this game from wire to wire, he directly made eye contact with Cam Thomas, had very specific words, whatever the messaging was. And we've seen this time and time again. It was, go take over this game. Like, this is your time. This is when you dominate. We've seen this all season long around Cam Thomas from all the players on this team, wanting him to take shots, wanting him to get into his bag, not deferring, not getting discouraged. And it really looked like there was this very clear message from Kevin Durant to Cam Thomas that you're the best guy on the court right now. This is your opportunity to win this game for us. And after that dagger 3, you saw Durant give what's normally, after he's on the court and makes a shot, that howl at the moon that he likes to do. He walked off screaming it into the MSG crowd. It was a really big moment for Cam Thomas, and I think you're seeing that influence of being around players like Kevin Durant and even like Kyrie Irving, and how it impacts your play on the court and the confidence that you come out there with.
Yeah, he and Aldridge combined to score almost all the points, the last, I don't know, what was it? This is like the last 20-ish points for the team down the stretch. And a big part of that was because, like you said, the confidence was there. The Durant piece is awesome. We've seen that from him multiple times this season where he's kind of either given him some tough love or given him because he's definitely done it. Like he's definitely, it's not, he doesn't yell at him. He doesn't show him up. He just said, when you make a mistake, you make a mistake. When you do something good, you get praised for it. And that was just another case of this. It was just awesome. We're going to look back at this game, I think, as like a galvanizing moment, like they said in the broadcast, for the team, and just as a stepping stone move by Cam Thomas into this ascension of whatever he is going to become when it's all said and done. Okay, we got a lot more to talk about here. Little James Johnson, some of the rotational stuff, just the comeback in general, as you can tell that we're absolutely buzzing. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Bet Online. Football season's over. We know that one finished up on Sunday. No big deal. Basketball still in full swing, headed toward the All-Star break, and then second part of the season, and then the playoffs. Baby, all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next coach is going to get fired. Ooh, I hate to go negative, but BetOnline's got it there for you. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, news this season. Not just basketball. BetOnline.net, your source for hockey, boxing, maybe some USC fight nights, Olympic coverage as we still go on with that over there. And trying to head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And of course, you made the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen. Why don't you go ahead and make the Locked On Now podcast your second listen? Nightly recaps of every single NBA game from other local experts across the network, unique to the Locked On Podcast Network, because we got all those guys in all those cities talking about the epic wins. Or maybe check out the Locked On Knicks and see how it felt to unfortunately fall at the hands of Brooklyn. Turn our attention then over to, and we'll send it out a little bit. I think I did a nice job there. I was going to go a little more ribbing, but I like the host of the Locked On Knicks podcast, and I generally don't have that kind of FU energy in me around games like this.
Oh, those guys are great. Yeah, you kids. I actually felt bad about it too, because we were in the group thread right before this, and we just got a little Knicks and Nets group chat that we just weigh in on every once in a while. And I think everyone resisted the urge to have any kind of opinion about it, because I don't know, it's just that, hey, it's basketball, man.
That's the way the sport gets played.
It happens on the court.
That being said, though, in and around this game, and it's easy to, I think, kind of dismiss everything else that happened before Cam Thomas and before LaMarcus Aldridge really take over and help bring home this win. But James Johnson, I said it over on Twitter. This is the Nets' new favorite guy to love, hate, love. It's all inside of this bag when he does it, and it works. You think, man, this dude just knows how to get in on it. When it goes wrong, it goes epically wrong. Like, that is what this guy is capable of on a game-to-game basis, and he put it on display in this one. First half, not so sure I'm loving what's happening here. And then over the third quarter, though, he started to figure some things out. It's just, he seems like he's one of these energy guys, and there's a number of players I think that extends to in a game like this. But it's almost funny because, by the way, inside of some groups and over on Twitter, they said, next guy up to get chopped when they bring in a buyout body, James Johnson. And I think games like this should give Nets fans pause, and just in general of don't overreact one side of it or the other, because these players, while they may have ups and downs, they do have value. They do have roles. They do serve a function on teams like this, and you have to be a little bit more even keeled, especially when you don't have the stars out there.
Yeah, see, this is a really interesting example and like sort of an inflection point for sort of, I think, how you feel about a couple different things around the team. So Nash, and I'll explain what I mean here in a second. Like, Nash makes a change to start James Johnson over Kessler Edwards. Kessler's been struggling a little. Yeah, he's been struggling a little bit, but it's an interesting move that you kind of didn't see coming. There was no idea that this was going to come until they announced the starting lineup. What becomes very clear, the reason they did this was so James Johnson could cover Julius Randle. Like, this is the one-to-one move. It's like Julius Randle is a bit of a different guy than we've seen. He's playing the four. He's a big dude. He can post. He can pick and roll. Like, he's kind of a problem for certain defenders, and he's big, and that's going to be a problem for Kessler Edwards. And I thought this was an interesting move to start, because it was very clear why it was. Like, this is what you're doing. Like, James Johnson is more of a body that can guard Julius Randle. It goes as bad as possibly could ever be expected in the first half, where the Knicks just can't miss a three. Randall's like hitting rhythm threes that aren't even touching the net, basically. And he's getting to the rim, and it's just looking bad. And James Johnson is also just kind of a mess, because it screws up your offense a little bit to not have Kessler as a floor spacer, but instead have James Johnson, who kind of wants to do DHO stuff and dribble a lot alongside Andre Drummond, and that can be weird, right?
Yeah.
So like everything kind of gets out of whack, and you're like, oh my God, what happened? Nash sticks with it in the second half, and it totally works because they buck the defensive presence that Johnson had on Randall. Like they make a total switch in terms of the intensity and the inability for Randall to kind of get anything going. And that was all James, or not all, that was a lot James Johnson in the second half with the defense, because like Randall was basically did nothing in the second half with Johnson primarily guarding. Ends up fouling out because of it, and because like the defensive intensity. And I just thought, like, Nash won't get credit for this because I think most people are going to kill him for the early piece where it just looks so bad. But this, the exact thing that they were trying to do to win the game, he just stuck with it and it ended up working. You know what I mean? Like, and James Johnson himself did not win the game, but the idea behind why he was playing so much, James Johnson was a plus 16 in this game. Like, for as bad as that looked, he was the only guy better was Curry plus 27. Like, he was a plus 16 in this game. And a big reason was for how much they started to lock it down on the defensive end in the second half.
And this really is where, to me, I'll tap into it here because we can touch on some other players and then the chemistry piece around this team in these last couple of games. But this is where it looks bad in the first half, right? But the New York Knicks are a terrible three-point shooting team. So you're having some defensive rotation issues. They're knocking down 60. At one point, they had knocked down 61% from beyond the arc and were shooting 60% from the field. Like, it was like, hey, don't even bother. Only from beyond the arc exclusively. And it can skew your perspective on whether or not it was the right decision to come in with a particular game plan. Now, if you're Steve Nash and you stick with it, you like to think that the results are going to play themselves out, right? Now, if Cam Thomas doesn't go off offensively, will everyone look at that move and say that it's still a disaster? Should have been Kessler Edwards the whole time. Should have looked differently. Maybe. But this is why you can't have concrete reactions 2 quarters into a game, because the Nets come back. It looks really good. And the defensive piece and impact that Johnson had on Randall is what helped as much as anything be a catalyst for this win. You had to get stops. Gave up 60-plus points in the first half, 65, I think, right? You had to find a way to shut down the Knicks in the second half and give yourself a chance to get buckets on the offensive end. So I popped it on the Twitter space for a minute at halftime, and it's so alarming to me how ebb and flow reactionary things can become. When Bembry got cut, it was the end of the world. You're never going to be able to replace that effort and energy. How are you going to get space for buyout market guys? And James Johnson is awful, and he needs to go. Then he has a game like this combined with other players like Drummond we'll get to in a minute. And this is where if it doesn't work, it's the coach's fault. When it does work, it's how good the players were, right? There's never going to be this middle ground where you look at it and say, maybe the long-term view on some of these decisions need to be taken into account.
Yeah, look, you're going to look at Randall's line, 31 points, 10 rebounds, and say, oh, did they stop him? Look, it's very clear. The second half, like, that was all first half performance. Yep. And it was like on ridiculous shooting. Yeah, he put up a nice line. But when it really was mattering and the Nets needed to get stops, and they just
-9, by the way, plus minus for Randall in this game.
Well, this is what I mean. And this is why it's like, okay, yeah, 31 and 10. Okay, who cares? Because in the end, this is what I mean. This is kind of what I'm getting at, is that that does not tell you the story of what happened here. They had super hot shooting to start the first half. There was some lackadaisical rotation, so some of those were easy looks. Some were like Kessler Edwards missed dunk into rhythm Evan Fournier 3, where you're like, what are we even doing here? Like, right, so like where you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, well, this is how it's gonna go. Maybe we hit the liquor cabinet a little early. But
that is when you say, you know what, it was all bad decisions. I'm done. I tap out.
Right, like, what are you going to do? Like, this is just how it's going. But you stay the course. You think we made this decision to start because this we felt was our best chance to win in terms of defensive liabilities, or who's not going to be about a defensive liability. We're going to need to be ultra physical against a team that probably at times wants to play very bully ballish, and that's just because they're not a finesse team at all, and they don't. And like you said, they don't typically shoot that well at all, and he's the kind of guy that is going to have that little bit to him, and he did. And so you're going to live with sometimes these little shimmy shakes to the rim that look terrible, and like the behind the back pass in traffic that somehow landed in Aldridge's bread basket. Like,
just
you live with that stuff. Exactly, you live with that stuff. But this, and I wouldn't mind if they just go right back to Kessler and start he starts the next game against Washington. You just don't need
Yep.
James Johnson enough. And it'll be interesting to see if they do that. And this is all to say, like, I'm not even saying like this is like that Nash has made every right decision. Like the first rotation with Javon Carter was a total mess. Like there was mistakes made. I'm just pointing to in the aggregate, this kind of decision to start James Johnson here, you have to look at it through the whole lens of the entire game of why they wanted to do it. And I think when you look at it that way, like the original goal is what ended up happening. So anyway, you can tell I'm fired up, buddy. This is like, this game's got me wild. And okay, we're going to plenty more to talk about here. First, got to talk about, like we said at the top, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30 or even 50% more for the same auto parts from a chain store or car dealership? I can't even say the car dealership for getting parts because you don't even know how badly you're getting soaked over there. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers like you, like Adam, like me at times. For over 20 years, Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, new carpets, and all of those parts in between. Cars have a lot of parts. Adam, how many car parts do you think there are?
9.
Oh my God, it's so many more than that. You can go explore, and you'll just go, if you figure it out, go to rockauto.com right now. Go explore their easy to use website today to find the solution for your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked on in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
So the last piece then to me, just real quick before we get into just the overall, I think, team chemistry and growth coming out of the trade and what it means for them going forward here is, you mentioned Kessler Edwards at the end of it. He has been struggling from an offensive perspective. And I do think, if I'll put in the credit to Steve Nash category or just a smart move. I don't care who you want to credit it for. When a young player is struggling, it's not the worst thing to give him a breather from it. And if someone's going to take lumps in a game like this, you'd rather it be James Johnson. If he's going to struggle, let James Johnson struggle, because he may not be as integral to what you want to accomplish over the last 20 plus games of the season as Kessler Edwards. And sometimes for young players, we know when you get to take a step back and watch things from the sidelines, it gives you a better insight into how to be more effective and maybe be a more complementary piece when you're out there on the court on both ends of the floor with consistency. And the blown dunk, it's a chuckle and we don't have to worry about it. But I think that was the microcosm of what Kessler's been going through of late. So it makes sense from that standpoint as well. You also look at this team then, and you see Seth Curry knocks down some big ones here. I said it over on, I didn't even realize, looked into it. Patty Mills coming into this game was shooting 33% from beyond the arc over the last 6 games coming in, started 0 of 3, finally got a couple to fall here in the second half of this game. But it was funny about the first half and the hot shooting of the Knicks combined with, we say these pieces matter and they'll start to be really good to surround the superstars with, but there was an early sample of, and if you're not knocking down the perimeter shots, suddenly everything else you want to do in behind it and what you want to accomplish in the lane is difficult as well. They turn the corner, they get the win. Do you look at this as the breath of fresh air that we've kind of talked about after this trade? Bruce Brown had additional comments saying like, yeah, no, everyone was cool. There was no problems, but we like what we're doing now. It feels like everyone is bought into the back end of this season, whereas maybe it was going to go a much different way if you found yourself after the deadline still with James Harden understanding where his real desires lie.
Yeah, well, I think that right now, at least this team we saw against the Knicks is a team that understands like sort of where they are on the hierarchy of this team. Like there's no one in this team that has like an ego around probably where they think they should be once the team is healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a group of, these are all role players. Like at this point, this is either rising guys who are trying to figure out their way in the league, a la Cam Thomas, Kessler, whatever, or dudes that have been around the block enough to know, hey, when it's going time, I know where I land in the pecking order. Right now, no Kevin Durant, no Kyrie Irving. Seth Curry knows he needs to take more shots, probably find a few more, non-threes that he's going to be taking, when these guys get healthy, right? Like a few more Andre Drummond putting the ball on the deck trying to get to the basket than we'll be seeing when Kevin Durant is around. 19 rebounds, by the way.
I was gonna say, worth noting, 19 rebounds in a stark contrast to we used to talk about DeAndre Jordan and saying, well, he can fill up a stat sheet in somewhat, incidental ways where the stats at the end of it can be a little bit bigger than the real impact that he had. This feels the exact opposite. Drummond's rebounds and everything that he does specifically to this team this year, it was like, oh yeah, That's everything that you've been lacking. This big body that wants to throw his weight around and even occasionally give himself his own rebounds on his misses to get the putbacks.
I was gonna say
Very
it's a
effective
little.
play.
There's a little bit
There's
of padding here.
There's a couple, but I'm saying at least 14 of these are solid, I think.
You don't get 19 rebounds in 23 minutes without like a little bit of like, I'm doing everything just to get the rebound and nothing else. Like, but he does. I'll say for Drummond, just having watched a lot of him over the years too, he does get rebounds in traffic better than a lot of other guys. Like, there's times where like the ball, we've seen this, and just think of how many times you've seen this from Nets this season, these 50-50 balls that like just cannot seem to go the Nets way. Like they just, they land over the top of a defender. The box out is a little weird. The hands aren't as good. The Nets just don't have a ton of size. Drummond does grab a lot more of those 50-50 balls. And that is sort of a breath of fresh air, because those hands, and like if his hands touch the ball, it's a rebound for him.
Yes.
Right. Like if his fingertips touch it, like that ball is now his. And that's not something I think that we can say a lot of these Nets guys. I do think he's been like sort of a stat patter for a lot of his career too. So I'm not going to go nuts about this, but it's still in situations like this where they need a guy to eat innings, and because they do not have superstars, and these are not crunch time game 7 minutes, you do need dudes like this. We said this from the beginning. Like, we're like, do I love DeAndre Jordan? No. Can he play 15 minutes for this team through the like the nitty gritty of the season and games that don't really matter that much? Yeah, because sometimes you just need a big dude to stand under the basket and get those 50-50 balls. Drummond is filling that need for a team right now, because they just don't. I mean, Sharp is a little bit like that, but like Blake is not like that at all. Well, LaMarcus Aldridge is definitely not like this at all. And they just need this guy to eat 24 minutes worth of innings on underneath the basket. And that's kind of what they need. And if you have 3 guys or 4 guys around him that can shoot, or like we said, like a Bruce Brown that can cut to the basket, it's going to be pretty helpful. We didn't see as much of that in this game, I think, because of the James Johnson starting piece. Like I said at the beginning, like that part wasn't as fluid offensively, but I think that was more having to do with how kind of James Johnson operates in the offense. But like I said, like this is where you just have all these role players, and you just know the second Kevin Durant comes back, it's like, okay, we're going to drop right back down to where we need to be.
And this feels like too. So, now back-to-back wins after the 11-game slide, one more game important against Washington before they head to the All-Star break. But you mentioned Bruce Brown even. I don't want to overreact to the way things have looked differently post-trade. And whether it's that you survived the deadline, so now you know that you're a part of this team going forward potentially if you're a Bruce Brown, right? Like you cannot have, even as early as game number 1 this season, and you're Bruce Brown, you probably looked at it and said, boy, I don't have the same role that I once did on this team just a year ago. Am I still a part of this? It looks like he's been rejuvenated a little bit. And we've already said before, with the addition of Drummond and of Curry, it feels like Bruce Brown can get back into a rhythm of having a real function inside of this team. Getting this last win then tomorrow against, we'll be in there in the post game as well. But it does feel like if you can go 3-0 before the All-Star break, coming off of this trade, it does set you up to say, yep, we struck all the right chords here in the decisions that we made ahead of that, and now you start to fold everybody else in. Is there anybody that you think, like for James Johnson, for example, is this big game from him and a nice performance from him great? And also, you could still be the guy that we have to move on from if we need a buyout guy. Do you think that the Nets are still hunting a buyout market player here, or do they want to try to ride this wave and again, fit everybody back into their slots and hopefully see that development come here after the break?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not really sure. I think we'll probably have to like spend some of the All-Star break kind of thinking that over, because when you start a game like that, Bembry started 3 games before that and was waived after the trade or something like that, right? And so it's not just because you start a game doesn't mean you're going to finish the season on the team. I think team is still far from complete. They still have probably a move to make. I don't know how robust this buyout market's going to be, especially around the type of player that the type of player that's going to probably getting bought out now. Like we're seeing Dragic has gotten bought out. Like Tristan Thompson was waived, but the Nets have no need for a guy like him at all now in their current construction. I'm not sure how robust that market's going to be. So this might be what they're kind of looking at here. And so I actually am not too concerned with it, but just because like this James Johnson performance wouldn't preclude me from moving on from him if there was someone really great on the market. I just don't think I just don't see that happening. I don't think.
And I think you talked about this over the entire season. The Nets need more 3 and D. Yeah, Everybody does, right? So you're going to have a hard time finding that. But what I think is 33rd different starting lineup tonight for the Nets and Steve Nash. And I do think as guys get healthy, the rest of these games, it's about refining who plugs in best. That's what I think we're talking about here, right? Where does Blake Griffin sit in the hierarchy of things? Can Cam Thomas continue to carve out a role for himself off of a performance like this and say, hey, I can be another offensive weapon for this team around the stars when we're back on the court healthy, right? Like that I think is really more than anything. You could name a body and tell me that he's going to be an improvement over someone that's on this roster, or you could tell me just keep refining until you get down to those top 8, 9 guys that are going to be there when the playoff run starts. That's all I want to know. Who fills those roles specifically, and taking the next 20 plus games to do so is as important as anything else you're going to accomplish here, excluding health of Kevin Durant and getting Ben Simmons out on the court as well. But that's where we're at, though. And I think it's a good thing, by the way. You get through this deadline, you make the move. These are the guys you're running with. Maybe there'll be a small move, but for the most part, everyone can say, all right, let's go. Let's turn this thing on and let's get ourselves back locked into a solid playoff position. And getting these couple of wins here matters, as we said, keeping yourself in the meaty part of the Eastern Conference standings.
Yeah, a little breathing room here. Like I said, we've been saying here, the second win in a row off of this really disastrous stretch is everything they needed. It'd be awesome for them to go into host Washington on Thursday, make it 3 in a row heading into the All-Star break. You have to believe after what you saw from this group against a really depleted Washington team that doesn't have Bradley Beal, that traded away Dinwiddie, that traded away Montrezl Harrell, that's kind of playing with Kyle Kuzma or bust now. Like you think you have to hope that they can, who's also coming on the back-to-back because they just played and lost to the Pacers. Like making this 3 in a row would be really nice. And after a win like this is where you start believing, okay, we gave ourselves some breathing room here. Let's start getting ourselves out of this play-in game now. Like that's the next goal. It's like get out of this play-in game. They're not there yet as of right now, but you can start to see signs of life when it comes to that. So we'll be back after tomorrow's game, or if you're listening to this on Thursday, tonight's game against the Wizards. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. I'll put the link over in the show notes.
Of course, man. And as we say, listen, big performances from young players are always interesting. You know who didn't know anything about rookies? There's a guy that would say something like this. A lot of rookies hit the wall after 50 or 60 games. Andrew Bogut, you fool.
Oh, no. One of the all-time worst poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.